Here we go. All right. So Deb is not here today, but that is okay because we have a very special guest, actually a former college classmate of mine, Aimee Velez. What's going on?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. We were just joking. It's crazy when you really think about, like, to me, and I think you felt the same way. It doesn't seem like college was that long ago. But when we
Mm-mm.
when we start doing the math, it's been a little while.
Seriously, yeah. 12, 13. It's been a really long time. Yeah. And time flies. I feel like the
Oh,
first 5 years, it was like creeping along. And then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, how college was a while ago.
a really long time ago. I know it's wild. And sometimes I've done some work with my old high school too. That's even
Mhm.
stranger because that's obviously a few years further back. I'm like, wow,
What
it's
high school did you go to?
Casa Roble High School out in
Oh, you
Orangevale.
went to Casa.
I went
Oh
to
my gosh,
Casa,
that's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah. I
So
used to
yeah.
live over in Orangeville. I went to
Oh, really?
Folsom High School and St.
Okay.
Francis High School.
Oh, very cool. I knew some
Yeah.
people at Folsom, and now were you there for the new Folsom High School or the?
Okay, so my class was the second class at Folsom High School. So
Oh,
I went to
got it.
St. Francis High School for my freshman, sophomore year, and then my junior year, I went to Folsom, and then my senior year, my parents sent me to boarding school
Oh,
in
okay,
Utah.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay.
So,
Yeah, no, I grew up in Orangeville my whole life, and
yeah,
yeah, my family still lives there, and yeah, it's a cool community. It's small, and I know a lot of people were excited to get out of there, but I don't know. I've always enjoyed it, and just Sacramento
yeah.
in general, I've been a big fan of. But
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely.
it was it's funny too. I don't know if you knew this, but so the class that you and I, so we usually start the podcast off by telling people how we're connected, and like I just said,
Yeah.
we went to Sac State together, and I want to say it was an upper communications class. I think
Commute comms. Yeah.
was it small groups? I
It
think
was small groups.
because you and I were in the same group and we did projects
Yes.
together. Yeah.
Yep.
And that class always sticks out to me too because it was a night class. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, would always, she had a class that was probably ended probably about 15 or 20 minutes before that. So every night she would sit like right outside the door of that
Hmm.
classroom. And so that one always it like sticks out in my mind because of for that reason. Like, that was the one time where our classes kind of matched up like that. And
That's
so
awesome.
yeah, but like I said, you and I had that small groups class together,
Yeah.
and that was honestly one of my favorite. I don't know how you felt, but one of my favorite classes. I think probably one of my favorite professors. I think it was Jerry Smith,
It
um,
was. Yeah.
and she was
It
always great. I thought.
Yeah, it was a great class. I remember at that time, yeah, I think that was my first night class actually.
Oh,
I
really?
remember, and yeah, and I was working right adjacent at that time to the campus. Like I could have walked to the campus during that time.
Yeah,
But it was my first night class, I remember.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a great class.
It was awesome. I thought yeah, I learned a lot in that class, and yeah, no, I had quite a few night classes, and night classes are just kind of weird, especially the 3 hour ones because
Oh yeah.
it's like you always hope the professor's going to be like, we don't need all 3 hours. And it's very rarely the case. So, like, no, we're going to use all three of these hours. Like, oh, all right. I guess we're here all night. So, but yeah, anyways, so that's how we're connected. But that's definitely not the reason you're on the show tonight. Not to just talk about all the college
All
memories.
the things we love about Sacramento and
Yeah,
Sac State.
exactly. As much fun as that would be, maybe you'll have to come on next time when Deb's actually here to talk about those things. But
Oh yeah.
um, you recently over the last couple of weeks had posted something really interesting about your own personal life and being from the foster care system. And obviously, we've been following each other on Facebook and Instagram and
Hmm.
Twitter basically since college. But honestly, and maybe I just missed it, but this is the first time I had ever seen anything from you about being from the foster care system. So, it really just fascinated me because I'm like, oh wow, I had no idea. Like I'm sure a lot of people didn't.
Hmm.
So why don't you just kind of take us through that whole journey? And I have so many questions ready for you,
Sure.
but like, why don't you kind of
Yeah.
explain your background, your life, and then what your journey was like going through the foster care system?
Yeah. So yeah, to be honest with you, I really did not start sharing my story until about 2.5, 3 years ago when one of my mentors, who I was very close to, had suggested that I shared it. It's actually a strange coincidence where she had me speak last minute. at a conference, and I had never really shared my story before that. And it
Hmm.
was just filling in for the last minute, and she had suggested it. But previous to that, I had never really shared my story. And I think because there's honestly a lot of reasons, but I don't think there's as many conversations. There were not as many conversations when was growing up about foster care and adoption and things like that as there is today. But then again, there wasn't social media and more awareness about it too. So
Sure, sure.
maybe it wasn't just that, there wasn't an avenue to talk about it whenever I was younger. But yeah, so I was born in outside of Chicago, in Illinois, and I was there for a couple of years. I had an older sibling at the time, and my mom, our mother at the time, had moved us to California when we were about 3 or 4 years old from Illinois. And unfortunately, during that time, she got really involved in lots of different addictions, from alcohol to drugs to the wrong type of people, just everything. To the point where she got involved with trafficking, and our house was raided on a couple of different times. We lived in Southern California, pretty close to the border, and she was involved in some arms smuggling and things like that. So our house was raided a couple different times, and so my brother and I at that time had entered the foster care system. The foster care system back then, it was the ultimate goal, which still always is to keep a family together whenever it works, when the dynamic works and it's healthy. So, my brother and I at that time would bounced back and forth from different orphanages to foster care to group homes to lots of different options within the state of California. And then when we were about, I think I was 5 years old and he was 6 years old. We were in foster care, where the courts had decided that our mom, was not going to get back on track, that she didn't have an option anymore to have us. And so at that point in time, the goal is to hopefully get the child to get us adopted. So we were in a waiting foster care home at that time, where we were supposed to be adopted together. And unfortunately, we were split up at that time. My brother was sent to another foster care, and I was stayed in the foster care home that I was in. Eventually, about 6 months after that, the family that adopted me found me, and there's kind of like a dating period almost whenever you get adopted, where they're trying to make sure, is this a forever home? Is this good fit for parents? Is it good fit for kids, etc.? Like everything like that, because the goal is to get kids out of foster care and into a forever home. My brother had gone to another foster care home. I think he went to one more after that, and then eventually got adopted by a separate family. At that time, adoptions were closed, so our files were closed. Our names were not available; they were changed. We couldn't find each other. He was legally adopted by a family. I was legally adopted by a family, and at that time, my family moved me from San Diego. My dad was working for the Bank of America at the time, and he got transferred to Sacramento. So when I was probably about 9 years old, right after I was fully adopted, legally adopted by my family, we moved to Sacramento. Um, and we lived in Rancho Cordova for a little bit, then Folsom, which is where I grew up. And then I lived in Folsom until, Sac State, things like that. My file was closed until I was 18 years old. So literally on my 18th birthday, I went to the Folsom Library and started Googling everything I knew about myself. And I ended up finding an ad. And you remember back then when you had to go to the library to borrow a computer to like look on the internet
Right.
to do any type of research,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember on my 18th birthday getting my library card, and I had like a 10-minute search time where I was
Yeah.
trying to put in anything I knew about myself. And adoption.com had a website during that time, and it was more of, back then there wasn't, I don't know, there was more of like message boards that people would post on
Right.
for
Sure. Sure.
organizations and stuff like that. And that
Yeah.
time, adoption.com had a post, and I found an ad, and that ad led me to my biological mother. And at that time, my biological mother, literally the month before that, my brother, who I'd been separated from, had Googled his now wife actually had Googled the same information, found the same ad, called the same number. And so our mom connected us. And that had to have been right when I was 19 or 20 years old.
Okay.
And so we reconnected and met each other. He lives in San Diego. He's from San Diego. He never left San Diego, still
Okay.
lives there. So if you saw, I've been living in San Diego before Dallas. That's why I was living in San Diego because my
Right.
brother and his family, he now has daughters and is married and everything. So he lives there, which is why I was living in Southern California
Gotcha. Okay.
until Dallas. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of time went by where I really didn't share that story with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Lots of different reasons, honestly. There's a lot of stuff you have to work out whenever you grow up in foster care and adoption. When you tell people that you're adopted or you grew up in foster care, there's a lot of questions. The number one question is always, did you meet your family? It's a lot of questions. And so I think when I was younger, people would ask me those questions, and it was kind of that thing that made you different and different not in a good way because you were kind of the odd one out at that time. So as an adult, it's different because those questions don't make you uncomfortable and it gives you a little bit more of an empowerment. But when you're a kid, it kind of makes you that person where you're like, I really don't know the answer to those questions.
Yeah.
So
So
it wasn't honestly till I got into, my, like I said, my mentor, she really got to know me. And as I told her my story, she was like, you should share your story more. And I have tried to make a point of doing it more, especially this year, because I've noticed the small times that I trust sharing my story, there's usually someone that's affected in a positive way that I could have never imagined would have been affected.
yeah, which makes a ton of
Yeah.
sense. And it's always, I guess it makes sense from like an outside perspective, but being the person who went through it, I imagine that would be a lot more difficult, like you said, because there's so much. Because I think I don't know. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the foster care system, but
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like there's this perception that okay, like the end goal is to get with a really good family, and then once you get with that family, life's good. But it's not really the
Yeah.
case, right? Because you've been through so much leading up to that point that it's
Yeah.
really not the end of the story. And it's not really the end of that journey. Like there's still a lot of stuff you have to work out. But I think there is that perception sometimes that once you get there, it's
Oh,
going to be
yeah.
fine. I mean, is that
Oh,
accurate?
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think that's a little bit like life. We always think if we get to a certain milestone, right? That
Right.
it's going to be smooth sailing and that we're done with the bumps in the road and everything like that. So yeah, probably. But I think, there's a lot of stuff. People go into foster care and they get adopted at different ages. For me, I was very aware. I wasn't a baby or anything like that. So you're very aware. And there's this period of time where you just don't have a lot of answers. And it comes up when you're like dating someone and, I don't have baby pictures of myself. So, when you get married and you talk about having children, you're like, oh my gosh, who's our baby going to look like? Well, for, people who get adopted or have, in the foster care a little bit later, things like that, or even things like your medical history, stuff like that. When we were kids, we'd be talking about who we looked like more, our mom or dad. But those type of conversations that are pretty typical when you're younger, you don't have the answers for. So you just learn not to kind of talk about it. But then you go through that cognitive phase of where you're an adult and you start processing things and filling in blanks, and you have better responses.
Yeah,
More
100%.
empowering.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's so after I went to graduate from Sac State, I was in doing an internship over at Capital Christian Center through their
Oh,
outreach
really?
department. Yeah. And
Okay.
the person who I consider a mentor and someone who I was interning for, her name's Michelle Raby. She has
Mhm.
a very there's a lot of similarities to your story and hers. I don't believe she ever went through the foster care system, but
Mhm.
when it came to, and she lives in Illinois now. I think she kind of grew up in that area, and I want to say sometime in St. Louis too. But she has a very similar story where there
Mhm.
was this whole period of her life where she went through and really didn't have a last name. Like she wrote a book, and
Mhm.
I'll have to send you the book because it's
I would
really good.
love to read that.
My aunt actually helped her write the book, and so but it's an incredible
That's
story. But like some of the
amazing.
stuff you're saying as far as not knowing your last, the last
The
name or
identity crisis of
the
it.
identity, not having the pictures, and this
Yeah.
whole thing is very similar to her story. And it's interesting because she said some very similar things where you just don't know, and
Yeah.
you kind of mask the pain sometimes because you're not sure how else to deal with it. um
Yeah.
but it sounds like from the post, and I think you posted on Father's Day, because I remember seeing the
Yeah.
picture of your dad, and
Yeah.
what a cool thing, because I mean, I imagine, I don't know what the statistics are, but I imagine that there's a huge number of kids that maybe never find a great home, or find a home,
Oh
but
yeah.
that's, it's not the best situation. So, I mean,
Yeah.
how often do you think? I mean, your post was very moving, but like how like often do you think about, like, I guess, what could have been and what ended up happening, being such a great
I
situation?
I honestly do think about that all the time because statistically, children who grow up in foster care and even the ones that are adopted, even to fantastic homes, the odds are absolutely stacked against them. I am one of 10. I
Yeah.
think two of us, my brother and I, really honestly, you can tell the difference in the opportunities that we were given just in the way we think, honestly. I think about how one thing could have been different all the time. I'm very lucky. My parents that adopted me were amazing and they were a great fit, 110%. I have half brothers that were never adopted. They aged out of the system. They
Mhm.
turned 18 years old and they were never adopted. I have other ones who ended up in group homes, never also got adopted during that time. And then I have, another half sibling that doesn't, you know, um, is going to be in the, incarcerated probably for life, in and out.
Mm.
Absolutely. Just different, grew up in a different world. I'm very thankful of the parents that I got. It is amazing. My parents were fantastic. They even the small things that led them up to adopting all those choices, I think that they happened absolutely for a reason. They were meant to be my parents. Wouldn't be who I am today without them. There's a lot of purpose in that. Absolutely.
Oh, 100%. Now, what was that movie that came out a little while ago with Mark Wahlberg and I think Rose Byrne? Do you remember that? It was about,
Mm-mm.
oh, I wish I could remember. Is it something family? Instant Family. I think it's called
Oh,
Instant Family.
Instant Family. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was all
I
about that
do
whole
remember
process.
that.
Now, do you feel
Yes.
like that movie, was that going through it, was that movie pretty accurate? Or how, obviously it's Hollywood, right? So they're gonna take some
Yeah, so
liberties,
it's a little bit glamorized, a little bit.
but I mean, did any
I
of
will tell
that
you
connect?
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. It's been a while since I saw that movie, but I do remember because a couple of people sent me that movie. One of
Oh,
my mentors sent me that movie, absolutely. Instant Family, he had recommended it for me.
yeah.
So yeah, there's actually a lot of really good movies. Antoine Fisher.
Oh yeah, yeah. Denzel Denzel
Yeah,
movie, and
that's
Derek
a
Luke, I
really,
think.
really, yeah, yeah, that's a really good one. There's a couple really, really good ones. But I don't know. I have hopes there's actually going to be some good foster care adoption movies in the near future because, like I said, I've noticed there's a lot more conversations through the pandemic, 110%. And I don't know if that is just the conversations where people were home and they started, having a voice,
Yeah.
or maybe projecting their voice a little bit more, but definitely more of a community for foster care and adoption recently in the last 2 years, for sure.
Well, that's actually one of the questions I had for you, because obviously the name of this podcast is Connectable, and the whole
Yeah.
idea is to connect with guests and help the guests connect with the audience, and then hopefully there's some common ground, common connection there. So that being said, community is a big part of that. And when you kind of started talking more about your story and you started sharing and people started learning more about that, did you get more connected with a community of other kids and other people, adults who went through the foster care system?
Not so many as there's not as many voices of kids that have gone through the foster care system.
Hmm. Okay.
And that could largely have to do with the statistics of how many truly make it into a place where their voice would either A, be elevated, or B, I mean, just to be honest, there's just the percentage is not very high of people who make it.
That's interesting. Now, do you yeah, it's interesting because I'm trying to, how do I articulate this to make sense? So, like, why do you think, like, I mean, I know there's probably a lot of stuff that goes into it. There's a lot of elements that
Hmm.
affect that, but is it an
Hmm.
issue with there's not enough great families that can handle a situation like that? Is it the system doesn't set up the families or the kids to
Hmm.
succeed? Is it, I mean, is it just a really difficult situation and it's hard to find great fits? Like, what do you, from your opinion and your perspective, like, what is it that makes this situation so difficult?
Yeah, there's definitely, the situation that I grew up um, in, every country is different, every state is different depending on their laws and everything. I grew up in the foster care system in California, and in California, foster care system would be the 80s. Whenever I was in it, there was a lot more financial gain to be a foster care provider back then.
Sure.
There's definitely leaps and bounds have been made as far as background checks and checking income and things like that. You know, when I grew up in foster care, you could have 10 children in a home plus your own children. If you could have a three-bedroom house. The house that I grew up in, there was
Wow.
at any given time 10 kids plus their own kids. We had one room and there was tents inside the room and you would live in it. And that was because there was a stipend per month for every child that you brought in.
Right.
Leaps and bounds have been made since then. Absolutely. Um, I think the other problem with the reason why is there is a lot of children um, in the foster care system, and perhaps not as many homes. There's probably more children going into foster care than people are willing to open up their homes as well, because of the statistics. For
Sure.
example, in teenage foster children, you're not talking about a toddler or a baby. You're talking about someone who maybe has a more concrete set of ideas. And that at that point in time, you really don't even know if that child is going to become adopted because they're going to age out of the system pretty soon. So maybe some people don't put the effort into getting to know a teenage or a teen foster because
Sure.
they look at it as, what time am I investing? What am I going to get back from this? Because if I'm adopting a 13, 14, 15-year old and they're just going to turn 16, 17, 18 and leave, or maybe because they think that they're stubborn or things like that. But the great thing about the voices that are happening on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter is that foster parents, and I know you asked how many children have voices. Am I finding a community for that? It's amazing the amount of voices in foster parents telling their success stories and their stories that go against the stigma that people have believed about foster care. They're showing, amazing connection um, and community with the children that they're adopting. And they're proving that you don't have to believe that it's going to be difficult or that it's going to be um, too hard for someone to do.
Interesting. Yeah, and
Mm.
I think there, I think it does require a special kind of person or a special
Oh, yeah.
family to do this kind of thing. Like I've said on this podcast multiple times, my wife's a teacher, my co-host is a teacher, my sister's a teacher. I'm surrounded by teachers, and they have an incredibly difficult job. Especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic and
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
Prior to that, it was still a difficult job, but that made it even more difficult. And I've done some work with some schools in like Oak Park, the inner city. And I
Hmm.
always felt like those are really tough situations for a lot of different reasons. And it takes a very special person to be able to succeed because you have to have a certain mindset going into that situation. You have to have a certain
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
heart to go into that situation because it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel
Yeah.
the same thing based on what you're saying. It's got to be the same thing with, I guess, like becoming a parent because we have two
Hmm.
little girls, And I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, it's not I mean, obviously, it's going to change things, but then you don't really understand how much it's going to change things until you're actually in it. And I imagine
Yeah.
the same thing can happen with a foster family where they have this idea. It's like, man, I want to change a kid's life by bringing him into the situation.
Yeah.
But there's also there's like a heavy responsibility that comes with that, and so you really
Hmm.
have to be prepared for everything that takes on. And I think it requires a special person. So it's awesome that so many people, like you said, are starting to share that side of things, where it's like, hey, it's doable, and you can have a tremendous impact. And this is the positive that
Hmm.
can come from it. I think it's a cool thing and a
Oh
positive
yeah.
of social media and all that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I had no idea it existed. Like I said, I my parents sent me to a boarding school when I was 17. And the boarding school at that time, people are always like, "Were you a bad kid? You went to boarding school." Truthfully, I was a foster kid, and so I just did not deal with socializing very well whatsoever. And remember, I went to an all-girls school, St. Francis. So
Right.
I grew up in a very conservative, all-girls school. And so I was very shy, very quiet. And then when I went to Folsom High School, which is what, 13 years old, is the first time I had been in a social co-ed city setting, and I had grown up in foster care. So it was even a little bit harder for me. And I didn't acclimate very well.
Hmm.
And because of that, my parents ended up sending me to this boarding school. And the boarding school specialized in different therapy and different things like that. But it wasn't until I went to that boarding school that I actually met or heard some of the stories about people who had grown up in foster care, because you really don't run into a lot of them. And if you do run into them, it's like that weird kid and they don't talk about it.
Uh, sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So really until then, going to that school and, people just hearing there, like, for example, there was a bunch of different groups. I was in a certain group, and that group was mainly dedicated to kids who had grown up in foster care, because there were a lot of the same issues. And the therapist at that time was dealing with like some of the underlying issues. They specialized in adoption and foster care, literally at that school. So I, but that was before social media. Like, that social media didn't exist.
Sure.
Now, fast forward, I think with Instagram and everything like that, there's becoming online communities that people have that's becoming a lot bigger. And like I said, I've only really realized it in the last 6 months. And maybe it's only because I've been sharing my story for a short period of time, but it's actually amazing. Even the hashtag, if you look it up, foster care, you'll hear some amazing stories.
Wow. And I'm sure I mean, it's obviously it benefits multiple people, right? Like it
Hmm.
benefits people who've gone through it and who are maybe
Yeah.
full grown adults at this point and are maybe now able to share some of those things and get some of those things off their chest and off their mind that they've never shared before. And then it's
Yeah.
also going to help this whole younger generation of kids who are currently going through it, and they get to hear those same stories, and it's almost like a
Mhm.
like a light at the end of the tunnel,
A
right? Like
beacon.
a beacon of hope, right?
Yep.
For everybody else, which, like you mentioned before a couple of times, like you sharing your story is one of the, like, I mean, probably the biggest benefit, right?
Yeah.
Of doing that is being that beacon of hope for someone who's currently going through it. And I think I took a screenshot. You had posted something about, it was like four things that you would tell your younger self, which I thought was really
Hmm.
interesting. And again, the idea of this whole podcast being connection, one of those things was you would tell yourself there are good people in this world. How long did it take you to
Hmm.
get to the point where you like genuinely truly felt that, where you knew, okay, there are good people there and I can actually trust people? Because I imagine that must have like a huge mountain to
Ooh.
climb.
Probably not until like my 30s, honestly. Not
Yeah.
until your 30s, yeah. Because you still lump, I mean, um, going into being, 7, 8 years old and being very, very coherent of what's going on around you, when you get adopted, you're like, okay, but is this real? Because there was a couple different houses and a couple different times it was supposed to be okay, right? So then probably, and then your 20s, you're just living life and you already have to go through those disappointments in your 20s. So maybe probably in my 30s I started realizing there's good people. And I'm telling you, sharing my story, I've noticed. So I was on this Zoom for work, and my mentor, who was the first person who asked me to share my story, really helped me share my story. She was leading it, and just by chance, I ended up on this Zoom. I was late. I was run out of the time, and I wasn't going to make it, but I knew my mentor was on it, and she had said she was doing it. And I was like, Aimee, you got to make it on this Zoom. You have to be supportive. And just by chance, there ended up being someone, and I work in this very small industry. There happened to be someone in the industry that used to be a social worker like 20 years ago, um, who worked with foster care children. And she said it was one of her favorite jobs in the whole wide world, but she ended up losing her marriage, almost her own children, because of the amount of time it took away from work that she was focused on these foster children because she was their only advocate. So it was really hard at the end of the day, even though she was a mother and a wife, to turn off her work brain and be like, I have to be mom and wife now because she was the social worker to these children. She was like the only link. And
Mm.
I don't know
Wow.
how this ended up happening, but during the time that we were in foster care, we had a social worker, and she was my only constant during that time. Absolutely. She was the thing that she was that one adult that was like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. She was the constant. But you never get to thank your social worker. You never
Oh,
get to thank your social worker. So I ended up on this call, and she was sharing her story, and I hadn't shared my story yet. And I just got to say thank you to her because she
wow.
said she ended up getting out of that job because it was a very thankless job, and it almost ruined her marriage and her family. And she had said that no one ever got to say thank you. And you know what? In that situation, I never got to say thank you to my social worker. So it was a really nice moment of just not even necessarily for any other reason other than she needed to hear thank you. There are so many people affected, no matter what role it is, whether you work in it or your friend's neighbor or you have an adopted cousin or you have someone who is thinking about adopting. I think there are so many ways people are affected, and there's no one common thread of business or state or anything like that, which is probably why it has been so successful on Instagram and things like that, because it's a community that is spreading, and it's spreading by sharing stories.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a specific experience too, right? Like, I mean, everybody's
Yeah.
experience is a little bit different, but like going, I mean, you guys can all relate to each other
Yeah.
in one way or the other. So I imagine like there's almost like a sense of comfort and peace that comes with that, knowing that, oh, all those moments where you felt alone or like you were the only
Yeah.
person going through it, there was actually other people that were going through it at the same time. And so just, I mean,
Hmm.
I mean, it has to be just a very therapeutic thing to be able to share
Oh
those
yeah.
things and then not just share it, but then hear it's like, oh, I went through that same thing. You did too. Wow. Like there are more of us. Like that's got to be, yeah, such an interesting feeling for sure.
Yeah. But it's also the podcast that I did Fearless Fostering a couple of weeks ago. It
Yeah.
was She has this amazing podcast, and it's for mm, foster moms. So it was really cool to be a guest because you have all of these foster moms who are they have amazing hearts because they are trying to do amazing things. Like they've opened up their heart and their house, and some of them want to adopt, and some of them know that this is just the place where they get to care for this child, and then they move on. So they literally break their own heart over and over just to provide this home, and she provides this amazing community for them. So it was really cool to be able to be asked questions like that because it would have been like, I would have loved to have my mom who adopted me have that community. But back then when she adopted me, we didn't have social media. So she didn't have this type of community, like you say. So it's just so cool to see, like you said, relatable sharing stories.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's something you don't think about, right? Like we talk a lot about, hey, how awesome it is now because of all of the opportunities, social media, you get to hear the stories. You can
Yeah.
watch a video on YouTube, you can see someone do a live or, TikTok about kind of sharing their stories, but we don't. Sometimes we don't. We focus so much on now. We don't really think back to, I guess, empathize with the moms, the dads who did it back then prior to all of those outlets.
Hmm.
And I can't even imagine what that would be like in that situation. You know what I mean? And just kind of feeling like going through it and feeling like you're the only parent that's dealing with a certain set of issues.
Yes.
And you
Right.
couldn't check social media, like you said. You're just you're just in it, and you just got to kind of,
Hmm.
keep going, and hopefully you have that, that mindset and that heart that just can persevere through all those difficult times. But yeah, like I said, sometimes I don't think we don't really think back to how, I mean, we talk about how lucky we are now with all the stuff that we
Yeah.
have, but like sometimes you don't really think about it and compare it to what it used to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um
My parents are amazing. I love them because they're always willing. Anytime I hear someone is like thinking about adopting or fostering and they need a parent's perspective, my parents are so amazing. I've signed them up for so many times to be like, Mom, someone reached out to me and she's been awesome to give her experience.
oh, that's
Which is
huge.
great because like I said, when my mom was doing it, she didn't have a lot of help. God bless her.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, well, it's such an amazing thing that she's willing to do too. There was I've mentioned it before, but there was a mentor of mine, and he helped write a book called One in a Million. And the
Mhm.
whole concept is basically, it's for coaches and athletes, or specifically coaches, but it can be really for anybody. And the whole concept is,
Yeah.
if you can affect the life of one person and change their life, then hopefully every person that they have contact with at, beyond that point, they'll change their lives because of the impact that you had on them, and that continues to spread. So at the end of your life, if you were somehow able to like look back at all the people that were affected because you affected that one person,
Mhm.
ideally you would have affected a million lives because of the one
Oh
person you
yeah.
affected. And so obviously, your parents could say that about you, because I'm sure now every time you share your story, it's affecting so many people that are hearing it. But it's because of that kind, selfless act that your parents, your mom, your dad, had in that moment. And now
Oh
she's
yeah.
continuing to do that because she's, mentoring others who are thinking about, going through that process. So like, it's really cool to think about like what an amazing impact your mom has had and how many lives have actually been touched just from the one decision to adopt you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. My
Yeah, it's
she's been great with that, honestly.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing, and so many people are benefiting from that, which I love to hear. I was going to go back a little bit to
Yeah.
uh, the the interaction you had with your biological mom, because like I said, my
Hmm.
my friend Michelle, she was a little bit older when she met her mom for the first time. But I remember her sharing that, and I think she talked about that a little bit in her book. And I mean, what a powerful moment that was. What was that like for you? I mean, I imagine leading up to that, I mean, you had to have been crazy nervous going into that moment, or
I
maybe
don't
not.
know that you know what, I don't, maybe I was a little bit nervous. My brother and I did it together, which is pretty cool.
But yeah, which is nice.
Um,
Yeah,
we met together, and then we met her, so we got to do it together. Um, I don't, you know what? I think it's just one of those questions you have in your mind. It's almost like a fill in the blank that you like, it's something that you want to necessarily know. But with my parents, I think I had gotten to the point where although it was kind of a blank spot, it wasn't necessarily something that I had to figure out. My brother and I both realized that our biggest reason for reaching out was to get each other because we grew up together. We were very aware of our, our mom's choices whatsoever. We were very aware.
sure.
Our purpose in searching for our past was really to find each other, which is
Okay,
exactly what ended up happening. And yeah, we got to kind of, write in the blank that we had in our life, but it wasn't. I don't think it changed anything for us, not
sure,
in the past and not the present or anything like that. So,
right.
um, we didn't really ask any, I don't think, we had any questions. Honestly, and I don't know if this is the same with your friend Michelle, if it was later in her life, maybe in your 20s, you haven't wrapped your head around all the questions that you would have asked, maybe.
Sure.
Maybe in my 30s, I might have had more questions, but probably not. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, it's just an interesting thing because you hear, Well, I guess you hear about that all the time about when, kids that are in those situations. It seems like there's always some point where they want to kind of dig
Hmm.
back into their past, but maybe not. I mean, do you feel like that's the case? Is there always something inside a foster kid that wants to dig back, or does it kind of depend on when in their life everything's like? I mean, imagine if it's a baby, they may
Yeah, I
not.
think it depends. I think it
Yeah,
depends, one, the situation that ended, that landed you maybe in foster care.
sure.
Um, and then I guess it probably depends on what happens to you after foster care as well. Um, for example, if you're searching for biological, some people really want to know their biological medical history.
Yeah, sure.
Some people really want to know questions like that. Um, whatever blank that they probably want to fill. Um, I have another girlfriend who grew up in foster care, and she just recently found her biological mom, and I'm sure she probably had a lot of questions. I think you're right. It probably has a little bit to do with the age as well.
Yeah, which would make sense. And like you said, the situation, there's a lot
Hmm.
that goes into it. So, and I imagine that some people, if they're going through, some kind of counseling or therapy, maybe that's part of they need that closure just to kind of
Yeah,
close that part of their life. And maybe for some people, I don't know, maybe I imagine for some people, it would probably be best just to leave that door
yeah,
closed because I imagine it would not
probably.
be beneficial, which is,
Yeah,
unfortunate because it's always kind of just like I think like you mentioned it best. It's going to be always this blank
yeah,
part, but I mean maybe that's just something you have to accept. I don't know.
yeah. With our biological mom, she made a lot of difficult decisions and she struggled with her own demons. Everyone has to choose how they look at it differently. For me, um, I think everyone struggles, and when people struggle, I really, I don't want to hop on the bandwagon of thinking she's a bad person. Um, I think for foster children, you always want to hope that parents heal. For any children, you want healthy parents, right? You want
Right.
healed parents. For society, we want healed people.
Right.
Um, but you're right, for some people, if their parents don't heal, even though you always hope for the best, it's probably best that they don't open that door, you
Yeah.
know?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of foster children that have to heal after their parents. So sometimes, like you said, meeting their parents, even though it may bring up even more questions and
Yeah.
things that are not healed, honestly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So to take it a little bit deeper, I was not expecting to ask this
Yeah.
question, but something you said just kind of sparked this in my head. So obviously we've talked a little bit about trust and how, as you're growing up, that
Yeah.
ability to trust people kind of you have to learn that, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
it's not something that you were growing up with because of the
Hmm.
uncertainty of your situations. But what about like forgiveness though? Like in situations where you have to forgive someone, is that something
Oh,
that's
that's a good
difficult?
question.
Because I
Mm.
imagine, based on what you just said, it's like there's it's kind of this situation with your biological mom where you can accept that that part of your life is, that connection is kind of not there anymore and you're okay with it. And you want, like you said, you want that person to heal, but you don't necessarily need to
Yeah.
be a part of it. I don't know if that's necessarily forgiveness, but like I imagine there's also a lot of pain that's associated with that person.
Yeah.
You always hear people talk about, hey, you need to forgive to move forward, but I mean, that's always easier said than done, right?
Always.
Um, so I guess I mean that was a terrible lead into this question, but
Okay.
basically, like, what is your relationship with forgiveness considering
Sure.
your past?
Yes, I would say I don't think in my 20s forgiveness came very easy at all.
Yeah,
I probably had not forgiven my mom, hadn't forgiven my parents that adopted me. There was not a lot of forgiveness in my 20s, but definitely different in my 30s for sure. But like I said, I think sometimes you have to think past your own I don't know, sometimes your own needs, right? Um, we want healing for people. We
yeah,
don't, I, we could wish bad things upon the parents that gave birth to me. I could wish bad things upon them. Bad things have already happened, A lot of bad things have already happened. we could keep recreating that cycle. But the truth is, I would never wish that. I want them to be healed. We
Yeah.
want people to be healed. Anytime people are having a hard time, whether it is addiction or alcohol, whatever they're going through, the tendency to be like, oh, that's a terrible. No, we want them to be healed because healed people, one of the biggest things I say, healthy people, healed people don't cause chaos. People do not just, healthy, healed people do not go around causing chaos, whether it be parents or relationships, whatever it be, friendships. It's just, that's not what you hope for. So with foster children, I want healing I wanted healing for her. Unfortunately, she passed away, and she passed away of her addiction.
Hmm.
So there was no healing, but I think there was always the hope that there would be healing. Never wishes that bad things would happen because why? You know,
Yeah.
Forgiveness is absolutely, they say you have to forgive to move on. Oh, maybe forgiveness. I don't know that I have to, I don't know that I've ever forgiven her. But I don't think that I can be mad. I have compassion. She struggled, my whole family struggled. And even up until whenever my brother and I met her, she was struggling. And, it makes me sad that she struggled, It makes me sad that there was many, many years that unfortunately she wasn't healed. Um, there's some really amazing stories of moms or dads, parents that have healed while their children have been in foster care. It has been that break, that opportunity that they needed to get back on track. Those stories, you don't get to hear them as much, but there are a lot. Some of them they're in the foster care community on Instagram and stuff like that, who literally, that's what I mean. They break their own hearts, taking care of children where they may not get to adopt them. This is really their safe space. And then they go back to the home, which sometimes is the ultimate goal if that's the healthiest thing, if it's healed.
Ooh, that would be man, I can't even imagine that type of situation where so basically like the family that was, taking care of this child may have to give them
Oh, it
back.
happens all the time.
Yeah, and see, like I said, having
Oh, it
a
happens all the
two
time.
daughters, um, like just that, I mean, obviously biologically they're mine. At least that's what I'm told. One of them's very, very white. And so I give my wife a hard time all the time. I'm like, all right, I'm just saying there's something suspect. I'm half Caucasian, half Japanese, but I'm just saying. Um, but that being said, um, just that idea of like, you know, investing that much time and love into someone and then ultimately having to give them back, knowing that it's the healthiest thing. Oh
Yeah.
man, like yeah, I'd be
So
crushed.
there was a really large portion of time in which my brother and I were in temporary foster care because the goal was for our biological mom to get back on track.
Sure.
It didn't end up happening. But yeah, that even happens today. Absolutely. And it happens a lot more than you think, not just in situations where there's a lot of situations where like actual blood family will end up fostering a child and then physically, legally adopting that child from a sibling, from an aunt, from an uncle, from a child, where they legally adopt. And that's considered foster care as well. But it's legal at that point in time in which they're adopted. But there's a large portion of time where you're caring for a child and you are, attached to them, but they may be going back. And those are really hard questions to ask, questions to answer, questions to ask. It's a hard situation. Like you said, it takes a certain person, it takes a certain heart. Foster care incorporates all of that.
Well, I imagine that type of situation too. If you have a situation where the hope and the plan is for the parents to get back on track so that they can um, provide a safe place for their child once again and be the caretaker for their child once again. I imagine that's something like the social worker. I mean, that would be a heavy thing for me. Like I feel like the amount of frustration and anger that would build up in a person if you're watching this unfold and the biological parents aren't taking the steps necessary, but you see that
Hmm.
hope in that kid's eyes each time, hoping that, mommy or daddy's going to come back and figure things out, and they're like let down each time. I can't
Yeah.
imagine the weight that that social worker would feel in that situation.
Oh yeah. I can't even imagine it even too. And that's probably why there's not a lot of lifelong social workers.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's kind of one of those things that you can give a good amount, a certain good amount of years, but that definitely weighs on people 100. And that's kind of a comment. That's one of my biggest things that I go, maybe the reason why I didn't have these conversations when I was younger is because you don't have those words when you're growing up to express it. And even when you're a
Sure.
kid, you're still trying. It takes, years to process what you went through and kind of defining that. And so that's probably the reason why there's not a lot of foster care children who speak about it as an adult. But luckily, like I said, the foster moms are speaking a lot more about it. And hopefully more foster kids too. But then when you think
Yeah.
about it, there's the whole, by the time they turn 18, some people may not want to share their stories as well.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah. There's so much to it. I have some other questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah,
Um, so just kind of off the top of my head, the social worker situation now,
yeah.
and I don't know if you know this, but a lot of social workers, are they people that were affected by the foster care system? Are they, oh,
Mm-mm.
just sorry, just knocking my stuff over. I use my hands too much to talk and they keep them still. Are they people that, had some kind of connection to, or is it just, I mean, how do you, I mean,
Mm-mm.
really, it's just people that have a heart and desire to do that.
Heart and Desire, or I mean, there's a large, it's a major now as well. I don't think it was before.
Sure.
It's definitely in the last 15 years become a major and a study. So, but before that, no. I really don't even know if there was credentialing qualification whenever I had a social worker. Um, I think at that point it was whoever was going to do that job. Um, and I don't really know that much about the social workers today.
Yeah.
I've only ever met probably one or two, honestly.
Interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
Because, yeah, I
And
mean, it's,
you have
okay.
to remember every state's different too.
Sure. Right. Which makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah. It just seems like such a, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me being naive, but to not have any connection to it and just to jump into it, um, seems like such a, I mean, good for them, whoever's doing
Hmm.
that. Because, I mean, like you said, the weight, um, and the toll it takes on just your personal life, family, marriage, all those
Hmm.
different things would be, um, just insane. So, I mean, shout out to all the social workers who are willing to do that, because, like I said, it takes a special person for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely takes a special heart. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I think this is something we could probably do a whole episode on, but like I said, we're running out of time here. But you had mentioned, obviously, like dating, right?
Hmm.
Um, and now, you, married to your husband, like, obviously you found the one, which congrats to you. That's awesome. But obviously, like, your whole story, all your experience, like, that is going to play a major part when you're trying to get to know someone.
Oh
Again,
yeah.
the trust, all of
Hmm.
those different things, connecting to someone, and all of that. So what was that process like in trying to find, like, when you started, dating, and you're looking for like a romantic partner, how,
Hmm.
much of a factor was your story, your background, your experience in that setting?
Yeah, I would say it took maybe it took a little bit of time. Like I said, I wasn't super open about it, I think in my 20s.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it was going back to Southern California with my now husband, and meeting my brother. And I think there is always the story whenever people hear about my brother and I. And so I think answering questions, and that is what started getting me. And ironically, at the same time that this was happening, is the time that my mentor was encouraging me to share my story. So, um, God bless my husband that he met me now and not 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I would have been open about it. But
Yeah.
he has been absolutely awesome at listening to me and asking questions and things like that. I don't know when I was dating that I ever really talked about it. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm sure there's some people that feel more comfortable, but like I said, for me, it's definitely more of a newer thing.
sure.
Um, um, Not something that I really super talked about in dating. But I'm very lucky in being that I found the one that it is someone that is open to talking about it and understanding. And, um, you know, everyone has their set of triggers and things like that. And truthfully, in marriage and in relationships, anyone that you're going to be with, you should know their story because it's part of what has brought them to who they are. And to understand their literally their chemistry means understanding their story. And that can be hard when someone's still trying to figure it out. We're evolving people as an adult and we're complicated people. So no matter what, that's going to take a little bit of fine tuning, and it's not easy whatsoever. But I'm very lucky, in finding that person that is willing to discover, as I have been the last couple of years, truthfully. He was there the very first time that I spoke. I remember how nervous I was. So it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cool that when we were dating, he got to be there for that.
yeah. That's really cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I like what you said too. Knowing that you have to know your significant other's story
Yeah,
because
right?
I mean, honestly, it's gonna, I mean, speaking for myself and my wife, there's things that come up obviously in life and marriage and all that, and it gives you better perspective, right? Like it gives you a little bit more understanding of why someone does things the way they do, or
Yeah,
why they think the way they do, or why they react the way they do. And I think without knowing the backstory, I mean, you're really at a disadvantage when you're trying to communicate with that person. And
yeah.
so, yeah, no, I think that's great. I like what you said. Like you have to know their story. It's hard to even imagine. It's hard to imagine not knowing, my wife's story and kind of how she grew up and all that, and thinking that this would all work out well. You know what I mean? Like it would be it'd be really difficult.
It would be, right? But
Yeah,
maybe
really
that is
difficult.
the thing, is that sometimes people don't always understand that there is a lot more in our makeup whenever you do take the time to listen. Because, my husband has his own story too. We're all complicated people. We all have, our stories. But when you find that one is interested in all of that. And there's a lot of connective dots that can happen whenever you are sharing your story, because you'll learn people's, their insecurities or how you need to support them, especially. And
Right.
I mean, come on, a marriage, that's huge.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's like game planning. Like if you're into sports, I mean, you're kind of game planning, right? And you kind of know what to expect. And nothing's perfect, and you can't plan everything out. You can't plan every interaction
Hmm.
or argument, but if you know where they're coming from, I mean, again, it's a huge advantage.
Hmm.
It's gonna make a lot of those difficult times and challenging conversations a lot more
The ingredients
manageable.
to the recipe of a person,
Exactly.
all
That's a great
wrapped
way
up
to,
in it.
yeah, that's a great way of putting
Hmm.
it too. Um, yeah, 100%. Well, that's awesome. Again, congrats to you guys.
Thank
That's
you.
that's awesome. And but, before we get out of here, I think we should get some people, excuse me, get people connected to some resources. Whether anybody who's listening, if you know someone, maybe you yourself have gone through the foster care system, or someone who has, whatever it may be. What are some resources, Instagram profiles, whatever you want to share, whatever you think
Yeah,
people should be connected with. We would love to
yeah,
provide some resources to the listeners.
yeah, for sure. Well, you can always, if anybody ever has any questions or anything like that too. Like I said, my mom is an amazing person. I will call her and ask her to speak to anyone, and she will do it because she's an amazing resource. But yeah, there's a couple different resources. There's, like I said, the podcast that I was on, Fearless Fostering.
Yeah.
That is an awesome one. America's Kids Belong. That's a really good resource as well. And then Together We Rise is a nonprofit, and they do a really cool thing where there's actually a picture, and I've been meaning to ask my mom to find it. But whenever we would go from orphanages or foster care or anything like that, everything that we owned would go in a trash bag, in a garbage bag. And that's basically how we would get everything from one foster home or orphanage to the other. My mom actually talks about how they gave her what I owned in a trash can. And so,
Wow.
yeah, they provide bags and backpacks and everything like that for kids in foster care. So that's a really awesome one as well. And then Casa's a really good one too. And they have different, I believe that they have a Sacramento. I know for sure they have here in Dallas, but they work with foster kids as well too.
Awesome. So
They're
everybody definitely
advocates
go
for
check
it.
that out. Check all of those resources out, give them a follow and support those things. That would be awesome. Um, one question I did have for you, that I
Mhm.
completely forgot, and we touched on it a little bit, but
Yeah.
so obviously since I met you at Sac State and since I followed you on social media and all that stuff, like you're a very friendly, very sweet person, right? Like you seem like just very genuine, you seem very happy. I
Mhm.
imagine that probably surprised a lot of people when you started sharing your story because I just to be honest with you, I would have never guessed just on the little I know of
Mm,
you, what I see on social media, and again, you're just like your bubbly personality. I would have never guessed, and I imagine that it shocked a lot of people. Like, was that your experience when you first like? Did you just start getting a bunch of
yeah.
DMs and messages and texts? Like, we had no clue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think
yeah,
a lot of people were one surprised, like you said, the demeanor. And but two, a lot of people, I have friends that I've grown up with that definitely knew my story,
sure,
but I would say a lot of my adult friends didn't know my story.
yeah,
And like I said, there was a huge gap in between why I didn't share my story and still processing and everything like that. And I'm probably pretty glad during the my teenage years when I did struggle with it a little more. I probably would not have shared it with as much grace as I do today.
sure,
Um, so yeah,
yeah. Like you said, some of that stuff is a timing thing for sure. You know,
yeah, definitely.
yeah,
I don't think I had as much hope when I was actually going through it as a child or as a teenager. And maybe that's the reason why I want to hopefully be more of a beacon of light to both sides of it, both the foster parents and the foster children, because I really didn't have anyone during that time that I could look up to that was telling me that it was going to be okay, that I would believe that had been through it.
right.
Um, and so getting to my 20s, and like you said, you asked how long it would be, how it was until I started learning to trust people. I think it was until my 30s, I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. My whole life, I was like, all right,
Mm,
something's going to happen. Something really bad is going to happen. It's going to happen. It's around the corner. This is like not my real life. It's going to go back to disaster. It's going to fall apart. And it wasn't until my 30s that I started breathing and trusting and sharing my story of being like, wow, God really got me through that all the
yeah,
way, 110%. It was going to absolutely be okay. I can breathe easily now. And I think about it and I go, oh, I really wonder if other kids going through that situation or other foster parents or anyone my age who hasn't even shared their story may still be struggling with it because they haven't found a community. So they still might be dealing with that, being the person that doesn't have the answer to the questions or is worried about answering any of those questions or is uncomfortable with it. And so like it really took me until being 34 years old to share my story because I was worried, I was worried I wouldn't have all the answers or that I wouldn't say the right thing. But the more I share, the more I realize there's a lot of hope in it, and I hope that that hope finds the right people.
that's awesome. We're just gonna end it right there because that was awesome. That was a great way to end it. Aimee, where can they where can they follow you? If you want them to follow you, if you don't want them to follow you
Yeah,
on social media, then we could just cut this part out. But okay,
yeah,
sounds
no,
like you're cool with that. Where can they follow you on social
yeah.
media?
At the Aimzilla.
I like that handle
At
because
the
it's
Aimzilla.
yeah, because I can
I
remember
think
it.
I've had that. Probably that has been my Instagram handle since the beginning of Instagram. It's always been that.
That's pretty good. It's like it's
Yeah.
memorable. It's not that difficult to
Yeah.
spell. It's easy. So, you guys make sure you go follow Aimee, and go back and listen and follow all of the different organizations that she mentioned and support all of those things. I think that'd be great. And Aimee, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Like we joked about before,
It
not
was
joked
so great
about.
to talk to
I
you.
usually make fun of Deb at some point. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to let Deb off the hook for not being here because she's on vacation, having a great time. But I would love to have you back on when Deb
Oh,
can join
definitely,
the
yeah.
conversation as well. And obviously, this was a little bit more of a, there were some heavier moments in this podcast. Next time, we'll just talk about some nonsense. I don't know. We'll think of something, whatever you want to talk about. We'll figure something out.
Some
But yeah, we would.
Sacramento stuff. I have lots of
Hey,
opinions on all of your guys' podcasts. So many
oh.
opinions.
Hopefully, have you enjoyed the podcast? You can be honest. I
Yes.
don't get offended easily. So if you're like, this
No, I
podcast
have.
sucks,
Absolutely. No,
okay,
I
good,
love it. I really
awesome.
do love it. Yeah.
Okay, if I can put you on the spot really quick, which
Yeah.
one have you listened to that you enjoyed? Did you have a favorite guest?
Um, I had a couple of favorite guests. What is her name? The the Hope Booth.
Oh, Gloria Umana.
Gloria.
That's a
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, that was one of my favorites too. I love all of you guys as guests. I'm gonna say that, but I really did enjoy that one. Yeah, she was incredible.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
loved
cool.
that one. And yeah, the simple one, the simple things one too. That one was good.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and then I was really relating to the one where Deb was talking about people who are rude in the
Oh,
restaurants
yeah.
during the pandemic.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. She can go off on that for quite a while. Yeah. She's going to appreciate hearing that. She's going to definitely listen to this and she'll enjoy that. So, well, awesome. Well, that's so awesome that you were that you listen and that you were, like I said, willing to hang out and share your story on here. We definitely appreciate that. And like I said, we'll have you on again at some point in the near future. It'd be
For
fun.
sure.
So,
Yeah,
awesome, Aimee. Well, good luck with everything and
thank
keep
you.
spreading all that positive message that you have. And yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the show. If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you like it, share it, and hit the subscribe button to get a new episode every week. We'll see you next time on the Connectable podcast.